December 27. Routes from Tianjin and Nanjing to Osaka are among the most affected. Bookings with domestic airlines to Japan have shown a declining trend since the three biggest companies Air China, China Eastern Airlines, and China Southern Airlines announced special refund and rebooking arrangements for Japan route tickets on November 15. Meanwhile, local businesses in Japan are growing anxious about their performance in the coming months, Japan's national broadcaster NHK reported. Experts also warn that Japan could see a 50% drop in visitors from China if the Japanese government fails to take action to rebuild mutual trust following recent erroneous remarks by Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi over China's Taiwan.
Now let's deep delve into the situation. Joining us live from Taipei, Taiwan is political analyst Rose Feingold. Rose, thank you so much for joining us here on A News once again.
Thank you.
Well, let's talk about Prime Minister Takaichi's recent assertion that a war over Taiwan would directly threaten Japanese security has drawn sharp condemnation from Beijing as crossing a red line. From your vantage in Taiwan, how might this strengthen or complicate bilateral relations between Japan and Taiwan defense cooperation, especially with Japan's planned missile deployments on the Yonaguni Island?
We know that Japan and Taiwan generally have a good relationship when it comes to sharing certain types of military and intelligence information. So that relationship already exists. And Taiwan, for example, has a military attaché at its de facto embassy in Tokyo. Retired Japanese military officers work in Japan's de facto embassy here in Taipei. So the flow of information already exists. What doesn't exist is something more substantive than that, such as joint military exercises. And frankly, that's really unlikely to occur in the short term. So the political relationship and the trade relationship between Japan and Taiwan is very close. There's lots of talk here in Taiwan about Taiwan people spending more money on Japanese products or visiting Japan in the aftermath of China restricting its imports of Japanese products. We're discouraging Chinese people from visiting Japan. How much of a difference that'll make for the lost sales to China remains to be seen. But going back to your original question, will there be greater defense cooperation? Again, there is already some level of defense cooperation between Japan and Taiwan, but we certainly aren't going to see something like joint military exercises.
Well, let's talk about China escalating a diplomatic pressure on Japan, rejecting a proposal trilateral summit with South Korea and summoning Japan's ambassador over Takaichi's remarks. What do you see as the most likely short-term retaliation moves from Beijing military drills near the Senkaku Diaoyu Islands, economic measures, or something else? And how vulnerable is Taiwan's spillover effects?
For now, it seems that China is using a range of all of those things that you mentioned. They're making diplomatic protests on a government-to-government level. There are spokespeople from a variety of different government agencies in China, whether that's the Foreign Ministry or something they have called the Taiwan Affairs Office, military spokespeople. So the media effort from the Chinese side is certainly very strong as well. And they've already restricted their imports of Japanese seafood and discouraged Chinese people from visiting Japan or studying in Japan. Military exercises are another tool. There's already been a little bit of that, but there's certainly the possibility that it will expand as well. So China does have a range of options that it could use to show its displeasure with Japan. It started to use those tools, and it will probably continue to use them in the near term. It really seems likely that there's going to be any sudden relaxation of these tensions between Japan and China. Now, when it comes to Taiwan, China could use those tools against Taiwan as well. So China doesn't only have to show its displeasure with Japan, they have the option to show their displeasure with Taiwan over this incident as well. So similar tools. China could conduct military exercises near Taiwan or expand the scope of previously scheduled military exercises. It could restrict imports of products, whether agricultural products or other types of products, industrial products, for example, from Taiwan into China. It could investigate Taiwan companies doing business in China. So it's certainly very possible that China is going to focus some of its response on Taiwan as well, and not only on Japan.
Well, that's an interesting point of view. And as you have mentioned, yes, not only on Japan, but also that's the stance of China that we are seeing for a while, and how we are going to see how it is going to unfold. But Takachi's phone call with President Trump, let's talk about that as well. It highlighted extremely good friends bond amid this spat, potentially signaling a closer U.S.-Japan alignment on Taiwan. As someone monitoring U.S.-Taiwan dynamics so closely, do you anticipate Trump's administration using this tension to push for more robust trilateral security pacts? And what risks does this pose for de-escalation efforts, in your opinion?
Any type of closer military relations between Japan, Taiwan, and the United States would certainly elicit a response from China. So if the three countries do decide to do that, then they'll go into that knowing that there will be a response from China. But the cooperation among the two sides, again, they do have good cooperation when it comes to intelligence sharing. And the United States remains Taiwan's most important weapons supplier. And there's a lot of speculation that in the coming weeks or months, the United States will sell Taiwan a very large dollar amount of new weapons as well. But what are we going to see as far as Japan doing for Taiwan's defense, other than statements? And frankly, after this incident, Japan's probably going to avoid public statements. The options for Japan in that regard are fairly limited. They're not going to sell weapons to Taiwan the way the United States does. So the avenues for enhanced Japan-Taiwan military collaboration are frankly somewhat limited. But again, there's the possibility of U.S. weapon sales to Taiwan. There's the possibility of more trainers from the U.S. coming to Taiwan. There's already reported several hundred American soldiers training Taiwan troops at any given time here in Taiwan. So the Trump administration has that option to use as well.
Well, the lack of communication channels between Tokyo and Beijing is not helping either, is it? It is evident in the failed U-20 breakthrough, for example, and it has fueled this row. How do you evaluate the broader impact on the East Asian stability, particularly for Asian nations like the South Korea, which is opting to calmly watch from the sidelines?
Yeah, that's a really interesting aspect about this. And to go back to your previous question as well, Trump had the phone call with Prime Minister Takaichi, but we haven't seen President Trump say anything along the lines of, I absolutely agree with the Prime Minister and what she said about Taiwan, or I support the Prime Minister in Japan in this dispute with China. Trump really hasn't said anything like that. So you mentioned South Korea. Yeah, they're on the sidelines. And not only South Korea, but the 11 countries in ASEAN, they seem to be avoiding this dispute as well. They're not making public statements that we think China is wrong or China's bullying Japan. You know, they've been silent, or if they say anything, it seems likely that they'll simply say, we hope tensions could be reduced and everybody in the region could just get along. But as far as showing support for Japan, we haven't really seen that from South Korea or from the 11 countries in ASEAN. And frankly, given that President Trump himself has not come out specifically and said Japan is correct and China is wrong, then why would those other Asian countries do anything or say anything similar? They frankly don't have an incentive to.
Well, lastly, Japanese public polls are showing that a strong support for Takaichi's firm stance against China. But this is not surprising, is it? Contrasting with Beijing's domestic narrative framing Japan as a provocateur. Looking ahead, could this public backing in Japan lead to a sustained hardening of the Tokyo's policy toward China? And what opportunities does it create for Taiwan in terms of soft power or economic partnerships?
Yeah, there's two aspects there. One is, will Prime Minister Takachi insist on her position and not back down? And frankly, it would be difficult and humiliating if she did. So she's probably just going to try and avoid this topic. Maybe she won't say anything new with regard to Taiwan, but she's not necessarily going to withdraw her previous remarks either. Now, the public has united in support around her, and the polls are showing very high levels of support. Frankly, that'll probably dissipate. She wasn't elected in an election. She hasn't faced the voters. She became prime minister by virtue of a party leadership election. Prior to that, the LDP party that she leads was not really popular with the public anymore. So chances are this high polling is a response to the things that Chinese diplomats and the Chinese government have said, and people in Japan are uniting around their government and around their prime minister, which is very understandable, but it will probably dissipate over time. As far as Taiwan, there's certainly the opportunity for greater economic engagement. That is something that would be welcomed by both governments. Japan would certainly welcome more Taiwan tech companies, for example, to expand their presence in Japan. There's already some of that with TSMC, the big semiconductor companies, construction of a manufacturing facility in Japan, which causes parts of the supply chain to go there and set up on-the-ground operations as well. And then on the cultural soft power side, as I mentioned, there'll probably be an increase in Taiwan tourists visiting Japan in the near term.
Well, thank you so much, Ross. Thank you so much for answering my questions and joining us here on A News. Always a pleasure having you here.
Thank you.
Well, with that, let's continue with yet another news about the Donald Trump and China relations. President Trump highlighted that China relations between the United States and China remained extremely strong following a private call with Xi Jinping, during which they discussed trade, global issues, and future state visits.
President Donald Trump touted relations with China as extremely strong on Monday following a call with Chinese leader Xi Jinping, who told Trump that Taiwan's return to China is a key part of Beijing's vision for the world order.